Hello and welcome to the Commonweal Policy Podcast. I'm Craig DL, I'm the Head of Policy and Research at Commonweal, and this week I'm joined once again by Keith Baker, a researcher in energy poverty at Glasgow Caledonian University and a member of our very own Energy Working Group. Welcome back, Keith. I told you it wouldn't be so long till we saw you again.
It's not been so long this time, and for reasons we'll come to at the end, I might be back again soon. But
yes, indeed. So this week we are delving into one of the papers that you did for us a little while ago now on energy performance certificates. This is the measure that Scotland uses to, or that's the framework that Scotland uses to measure thermal efficiency in homes and other buildings. And we're going to talk about what they are, why they're doing it wrong, and how we can do it better. So we'll start off just at the very basic. Why do we need to worry about how we insulate our buildings at all, and why is this becoming an increasing problem as we're going into the Green New Deal?
Well, actually, roll back very, very slightly on that. Why do we not maintain our buildings to decent levels of quality? Before we get to insulation, we'll come to insulation in a second. If you're living in Scotland, then there is more than a 50% chance that the building or the home that you're living in is going to need some level of disrepair. Some level of repair. So actually, the first thing we should be doing is maintaining our buildings. But the Scottish Government's maybe not so keen on talking about that because it's not quite as sexy as things like energy efficiency and renewables. Building disrepair in Scotland is a massive problem. We don't talk about it. But once you've got your home to a decent level of, a decent standard, obviously with climate change being the biggest threat to humanity, more so than the virus. Then insulation allows us to use less energy for heating, and it should, if it's done properly, allow us to use less energy for cooling if we don't put too much in. And once you've got a nice energy efficient home, which might mean doing things like putting proper double glazing in, insulating your loft to a sensible level, and I come to over insulation in lofts because it does happen. Draft proofing. Getting the building back up into into the sort of standard it was designed to and brought up to the current building regs. And the reason I say the sort of way it was designed originally, tenements are incredibly energy efficient buildings for their time. One of the things we don't necessarily want to be doing, and others will disagree, that you can seal up a tenement and make it very, very airtight and everything else. But generally, if you get a tenement up to a really good standard of maintenance, and you put some draft proofing in, and you get your windows done, if the council allow you to, because some are in conservation areas, then at that point we can start dealing with the amount of energy that we're actually using and how much of that we need to be generating from renewables. So if you think that, say putting a heat pump on, and we can maybe talk about the pros and cons of heat pumps later or at some point, you don't want to be installing a system that is either undersized or oversized, because if it's undersized, you won't get enough heat out of it to keep your home to a comfortable level, and if it's oversized, you're going to be paying too much for the cost of the kit. And you're going to be using you're generating heat you can't really do anything with, generating electricity and heat that you can't do anything with. You know where I'm going on this. So you want to be paying an optimal amount for the amount of energy that you need to use to heat your home and cool it and use all your appliances and stuff. And that then actually makes it easier for building scientists like me when we come to the statistics to think, well, okay, that building is operating and using about the amount of energy that we think it should be using. Very, very few buildings actually actually operate optimally. But we can come into this when we start going a little bit deeper into EPCs and why EPCs are a complete waste of space.
Yeah, I do have a bit of an anecdote about that, about visiting a demonstration passive building in Scotland. Probably shouldn't mention the names, but and this building in particular it's not a home, it was a commercial building, and it was heated by 3 ground source heat pumps. because that was the number that the engineers designing the place had scoped out for the size of the heating system for the size of this building. But they had completely underestimated the thermal efficiency. So the owners of the building were saying we actually only rarely used more than one of the heat pumps at any given time, even in the depths of winter. So yeah, I really get that point about matching up your heat demand with the source that you're using. You have to get these numbers down quite precisely. Otherwise, you're either going to be too cold or you're going to be wasting resources. And I do really get your point about maintaining buildings, because when my wife and I moved into our current house, we knew we were getting a fixer-upper, but there was certainly a bit of a sinking feeling when we had a rainstorm not long after we moved in, and we discovered there was water coming down the chimney and seeping through the walls, and this damp patch was spreading over our living room. It was not pleasant. That's all fixed now. We replaced the roof. We've been insulating the loft. All nice Green New Deal friendly insulation as well, but that's for another story. That journey there. So as we mentioned, that we're going to be talking about energy performance certificates. This is the framework we use to measure energy efficiency. What are they? What do they measure, and how do they actually measure the thermal efficiency of a building?
Right, measure for a start is probably slightly misleading. The way we generate a full EPC for a new building, it all goes back to the Building Research Establishment's domestic energy model, what we know known as BREEAM. It's now in version 12. That's the model that underpins the standard assessment procedure, which is the tool that's used to generate EPCs or full EPCs. So if you've got a new building, it will be run through BREEAM and SAP and used to produce an EPC. If you're in an existing building, the chances are they will cut a few corners, a lot of corners, and use the reduced data set standard assessment procedure, which, if you've ever done a home energy check, and I thought most people have by now, it's really not much more than that data, if that, it's exactly that sort of thing. And from that, we're expected to work out how much an individual building, how much energy an individual building uses. I'm simplifying a bit, but I'm not simplifying much. So that then generates your EPC, which is the energy label you get on your home. And as well as I do that we don't use a lot of real data, so calling it measuring is really stretching it. And one of the things that me and my team have argued for years and years and years, in fact I was arguing before I moved to Scotland, is that we need to be using more and more real data and using it better. Just for a little bit of, just so I know, this is why I know what I'm talking about. My PhD is actually in domestic energy consumption, and as part of that, I did the first study in the UK to use actual annual energy consumption data to look at technical, social, and economic differences in energy consumption for a few hundred buildings spread across Leicester and Sheffield. And then with Ron Mould, who's also a member of the Energy Group, when he was doing his PhD with me back around about, well, he finished in 2018, but he started in 2013, working full time. So we did the first study in Scotland, and then as a spin-off of that, we did the first study to look at the differences between urban households and those in rural and island areas. And what we showed, funnily enough, was that not just that the energy spend gap, the energy expenditure gap is much greater than what the Scottish Government's figures, which are based largely on EPCs and RDSAP and SAP, were saying. That gap is much bigger than what the official statistics were suggesting, but also the distributions are different. So if you look at the distribution of energy costs for urban householders, they are effectively, it's not linear, but there's a very, very, very strong skew towards lower expenditures. And that's because of things like sharing heat in tenements, because, all the sorts of things you would expect about urban areas.
So basically someone in a top flat benefits from someone below them putting heating on, that kind of thing. Yeah, and more standard type housing. Whereas if you go out into rural and island areas, there's a whole load of different behavioural factors. People tend to come and go through their doors a lot more. People have animals.
dogs, small herds of sheep, that kind of stuff. And what we see is actually it's not like a normal curve distribution, but it is a very, very different distribution in rural and island areas, and it does skew much more towards people spending more money on their energy, and particularly on heating. So that's what we showed, and that's actually why we managed to get the financial uplift for rural and island householders into the Fuel Poverty Act, which was the one success we've had. We've been fighting on EPCs for a lot longer.
I mean, from talking to you over the years about things like domestic energy use, one of the things that I think raised my eyebrow and got me really interested was when you told me that there's a surprising amount of house energy goes into flushing the toilet, because you have to heat up that block of water in your cistern. It comes up to room temperature. You flush it away and you replace it with new cold water.
Yeah, that wasn't me that did it. I can't claim that. That was work by Angela Druckmann at Surrey University, and she gave a presentation at a conference that I helped organise quite a few years ago. And I said to her afterwards, that'd be the one thing that everybody who's at this conference takes away from it. But yeah, the single individual greatest energy use in the life cycle of a toilet is in the heat that you flushed away when you flush the toilet. Because if you're, well, we're working from home a lot more now, but if you're away from your house all day, that water sits there, soaking up the heat, and then it gets flushed away. And you can actually now get I don't know how easily available they are, but you can actually get some kind of heat recovery system for toilets. And it's a minor thing, but I'm like, why the hell don't we have these systems for tenements? Because where tenements, you've got shared drains, and you could actually take that heat and pump it back into the atrium space. But that's a minor thing, but it seems so obvious as a way of just saving a bit of energy.
Yeah, but as we go through the Green New Deal, we're obviously going to catch the low-hanging fruit first, and we'll be making the big changes. But as we get towards the end of it, we should be looking at these small, minor things that shave off an extra % here or there, because I mean, heat recovery is still recovering and reusing resources, and we should do that wherever it's feasible. But coming back to the EPCs, okay, they are really, obviously, really flawed. I mean, there will be people out there that defend the idea of modelling, and being a scientist, both of us, we will be well aware of the power of modelling, but we are also very aware that you have to make sure that your assumptions are valid, and the best way of doing that is testing it on real data. If you're not doing that, how badly wrong can it go? How big a gap are we talking about with between what an EPC says a house should be and what you actually find when you measure it?
The short answer is orders of magnitude. So start off high, and the thing with Breedem was it was originally developed on a group of about 30 houses in Milton Keynes, which were semis and semi-detached, detached and semis, I think, but a group of very, very standard build homes in Milton Keynes with standard occupancy, sort of two adults, child, working, normal 9 to 5 hours and stuff. And Breedem has evolved a lot since then, and I'm not going to knock the people behind it, because as you've just said, modeling is important, and it serves a useful role, but it was always designed really to look at the building envelope. So the bit your walls, your roof, your heating systems, that kind of stuff. The moment you shove people into it, it flies. Its accuracy starts to fly out the window. At the time, when I was doing my PhD, we actually had the National Home Energy Rating Services model as well, which was a sort of a competing model, and they were both partly funded by Westminster. And my work showed that NHER was actually the better one, because, again, it wasn't perfect, but it was more adaptable for occupancy. And in about 2012-ish, the Westminster pulled their funding for NHER. One good thing I will say about the Scottish Government is they did carry on using NHER and reporting both for a couple of years afterwards. But obviously, with the funding ran out, that was it. Again, NHER wasn't perfect. But the more you start drifting away from a standard 2-3-bed semi built in the 1980s and situated in Milton Keynes, so you've got to consider the outdoor environment and the temperature and climate and stuff and all all of that as well. The more you get, the more you get a divergence between the real world and what's actually in the model, and it will get to the point that if you're thinking of, say, a traditional building up on Shetland, you can pretty much ignore it. I think we said we might come to traditional builds a bit more, but they're really not good at dealing with older traditional properties, which do tend to be very individual as well. I mean, tenements less so, but your sort of your typical old traditional buildings in the Highlands and Islands, all buildings are unique. No building will perform exactly the same as the building next door to it, even with very standard conditions, same heating system, same wall design, that kind of stuff, because there will all be there will all be subtle differences, and that could be physical stuff, it could be stuff to do with the occupants, it could be local microclimates. So the more you diverge away from the standard, the bigger the difference gets. I was going to go somewhere with that. I'll probably remember that, Rand. Oh yeah. In terms of how we assess that, I'm going to start mentioning the Energy Saving Trust in a minute because I can't avoid it. But a lot of when a lot of surveys are done, you quite often get shortcuts like drive-by surveys. So somebody, if they're, I think it's slightly different if you're putting your house up for sale and you're having an EPC done as part of that. But if you're generating a sort of a database of sort of EPC type data, it's not uncommon for somebody to drive past in a car down the street of houses, and they'll look at the age of the property, or they'll think they know what the age is, and they'll look at sort of the general conditions, and they might just say, well, okay, we think this building was built in year whatever, and therefore it will have whatever level of loft insulation. If anybody's ever had, people who've had an assessment done will know that it's not a requirement for the building surveyor to go up into the loft because of health and safety regulations. Now, in the case of I sold my old house just over a year ago. In the case of that, we had a building surveyor come round, and she wasn't very good. I said, I've got a fixed loft. I had a fixed loft ladder, one of these pull down ones, totally safe. So I said, well, it's perfectly safe for you to go up in the loft. No. Like, right. Well, up there you'll find I've got 150 mil of loft insulation, and it's a sheep's wool recycled plastic mix produced by a wonderful company called Thermofleece, based down in the north of England, who I highly recommend. Now, different types of insulation will perform in different ways as well, and we mentioned overheating. I just want to touch on it because this will come up with the mandatory improvement stuff that we've talked about before and we put out on our website. Thermofleece and similar type products are great because you get a much better thermal profile, which means if you think you heat your home up, it gets hot, you cool it down, it gets cool. But where you're using certain materials, and sheep's wool's one, recycled cellulose from newspapers is another, you actually flatten out that curve. Especially if you're using your boiler, well, and all that kind of stuff. But I was actually achieving in my old house, which was a 2-bed terrace, stone terrace, or stone side walls, brick front walls. I was getting 21 degrees C flat upstairs. Can't comment on downstairs because I have dogs, and back door was always open for the dogs to come and go. And that was great. And aside from the depths of winter or the height of summer, that was giving me a really comfortable environment. But in summer it would overheat, and if you get an EPC done at the moment, if you've got 150 mil, it will, one of the recommendations that will come back is to boost up to 250 mil of insulation. And I turned around to her and I said, look, the reason that's in there is because this property is already overheating in the height of summer. And me and my boss, probably about 10 years ago now, had a meeting with Scottish Government and he is an urban heat island specialist. We were trying to convince the Scottish Government there were homes in Edinburgh that were overheating back then, and they just did not want to believe us. And it's like, we've got the data. We've actually got the measured data from from homes. I think his data is coming from Glasgow more than Edinburgh, but this was 10 years ago. So I would not have put an extra 100 mil of insulation on. Another thing the building surveyor picked up on, which I managed to get removed from the EPC, was she said, "Oh, you've got a cavity that can be filled." And bearing in mind, I teach building surveyors, And I did turn around to her and say, well, I can tell you where in, I can find out and tell you where in Freedom to put the adjustment in for this if you want. But you can tell by the fact that my vent, the vent that's in the wall, is underneath the bay window, that is not a full fillable cavity. And it's probably not one that you should fill, because some cavities are fine to be filled, particularly in more modern properties. But the reason that you tend to get cavities in older properties is to improve airflow and to deal with moisture buildup and all the damp that will come from that. And of course, this was underneath a window. It's like, well, there's not a full wall sat above it, so that was a little bit of an argument. But I just said, well, I can go back and check with people that the other people that I know, and we can tell you that that's the case. So we do. I have to be careful because I work for a university that trains an awful lot of building surveyors. I hope she wasn't one of ours. Clearly not up to our standards. But this is not difficult stuff. That's dealing with building surveyors. A lot of the sort of the home energy advice that you get from the likes of the Energy Saving Trust will be delivered by people who have probably at best a City and Guilds qualification in energy awareness. They are not building scientists. They are not building surveyors. They are not certified. You might find the odd one that is, but I would imagine they'd be able to earn far better money somewhere else. And the reason that we're getting this push on this, and this is where we're getting into the EST, as has been seen in the Ferret recently, and came through in the news, that was in the Herald as well, that Scotland does appear to be run by quite a lot of organisations that like getting money out of the Scottish government in return for saying nice things about them and having a bit of influence and all that kind of stuff. And the EST portrays itself as a lovely, not-for-profit organisation that's there to help energy efficiency in Scotland, and they're actually very, very good at helping, shall we generalising only very slightly, getting middle-class people to put decent levels of insulation into their homes. But they're just because they're not for profit, and I've worked for a not for profit, so this is experience talking. Not for profits does not mean they're not out there to make money. They won't be making money for shareholders, but they'll be putting money into their business so that in times of financial problems, they've got that capital there and to grow their own capacity. And it is very, very much in their interest to peddle how wonderful EPCs are. And they've been doing this for a long time. They make quite a lot of money out of delivering home energy checks. So it's great that we've got a service like that, but it really should be publicly owned and fully transparent. And if anybody wants to sort of take me up on this, if you go onto our website, my own website at www.energypovertyresearch.org, you can find the energy performance certificates paper and a few other things on there. This is, I don't see this as particularly controversial, and every consultation response that we've written has been saying exactly the same stuff. I won't bore everybody with the story about the time I led the review of the energy assistance package for the Scottish government and what happened there, because that's we've not actually published the evidence on that. We could do. We should have legally challenged the Scottish government over it, but we'll probably just publish it anyway. And I don't, having spoken to civil servants about it, I don't think for one moment we're going to get sued about what happened with that. But there were some fairly serious allegations involved, and we communicated them to the minister. And I think the civil servants, when we had the meeting, said, "Oh, it didn't happen on our watch anyway, so we're not concerned." Right, fair enough. I'm only accusing you of breaking the Data Protection Act and a couple of other things. But hey, that's a story for another time.
Yeah, I mean, folk who are subscribed to the Commonweal newsletter will know that our first monthly policy newsletter went out this morning, in which I was talking exactly about the need for greater transparency in government. So nice little segue into the plug for that. If you've not signed up for the Commonweal newsletters, please do. You'll get a weekly roundup of everything that we're getting up to, and once a month you'll get a letter from me telling you about what is interesting in policy news in Scotland. So I'll put a wee link to the newsletter in that. So you've probably already answered this one in part, Keith, but if EPCs just don't work, if they're just this flawed, why does the Scottish government still use them? And there was a bit of a thing during the election there from the SNP. There was a promise in there to improve EPCs. can they be improved? What is the Scottish Government looking to do to try and improve them? Can they actually be fixed?
Well, the long-awaited consultation landed a few days ago. And it's interesting reading it because some of the language that they use could actually have been pinched from our word. I don't pinched, they can have it. There's a few bits of language in there that I was like, didn't we write it almost exactly that sentence? Yeah. The reason we have to have them, and there are good reasons. I don't want everybody just to turn around and go, well, EPCs are a complete waste of time, because I do think they are redeemable if we took the sorts of action that the Scottish Government is not minded to take. They were brought in under the European Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which is a really, really good directive, actually. And it's very, very clear what is required. And it's the same sort of energy labeling that you get on appliances and things as well. It's exactly the same sort of principles and thought process and stuff that go on behind it. The guidance on it is really good as well. Now, the long version of this is in our policy paper, which we've already mentioned, but we did go through it in that paper and we said, okay, well, this is what it's actually saying. And I wrote it with Ron Mould. It was actually the first policy paper we did for Commonweal. We wrote that because the number of times that we've been to events and spoken, and people just turn around just to go, right, well, if not EPCs, what? Well, we have to have EPCs of some form. So what we're building scientists. We sat back and we thought, right, what would we do? We looked at the directive, and because of our work using real data, we thought the directive is very, very supportive of using real data. It also wants, not surprising for the EU, wants sort of harmonization across Europe. And I think over time, there are more data issues in some countries than others, but I don't think it would be at all impossible to get real data into most EPCs in most countries. You won't get that for new builds because they have to be modelled until people go into them. But then simply what you do there is you do a modelled assessment based on BREEAM. You'd have to do it on BREEAM really. And then a couple of years later, you go back and you do, you get the energy bills. Now, these energy bills aren't going to be perfect, because if you're say you're a young family moving into a house that's been vacated by somebody, I don't know, an elderly person living alone, then the amount of energy that you're going to use is going to be completely different to the people that you're buying the house off. But one of the things that we say in the paper, and one of the things they sort of hint at in the consultation, we suggested, or we recommended, that future EPCs could take some sort of anonymized general data about the householders that are selling the property. Number of house, number of people, what their sort of working pattern was, if the property had been empty for any significant period of time in the year before. It's not impossible. In fact, I would say it's not difficult to get hold of annual energy consumption data for every household in the UK, because it is both collected by the energy companies and it is passed on to Westminster, which is how I got my data for my PhD. There are other ways of getting it as well, but as always with the Scottish Government, where they find a problem and they can go, well, that's a non-devolved issue, they tend to rely on that rather than trying to think of sort of creative solutions. The reason that's in the consultation document for why we might not do that is because that would mean moving away from alignment with England and Wales as well. And I'm like, well, yes, and we want to become an independent country. We want to maintain better alignment with the EU. The EPDP, the directive is really quite clear on what it says. No, they don't want to support a separate Scottish model, and there's a simple cost reason for that. But we never said that in the first place. We said that would be unrealistic based on the costs of it. But we might want to throw BRE a bit of money. Some of my friends there will go, oh yeah, give us more money. But we might want to throw BRE a bit of money for a bit more of a Scottish fork of it. The government would have to have that conversation with them, and look at the costs involved. But I think it would be another little sort of a step forward. But using more real data, we can do. And that doesn't necessarily have to go through modeling, and actually that will then improve the models. Building modelers love dealing with real data because it's like I can validate my model against it. And it will mean that when we get new buildings constructed, that the model performance of those buildings will be much closer to what the householders should expect when they move into them, which benefits everybody. But we can
Yeah,
go through
and that's actually
Sorry.
a really important point, that getting this data now on existing use cases then allows you to design better houses in the future. And that's certainly something that I've been shouting about at the moment, in the sense that right now we're still building things at sort of relatively conventional thermal energy standards, but we're doing it knowing that by 2045 we need to have a Green New Deal. So you have houses going up just now that within the lifespan of their mortgage will have to be extensively retrofitted. So what I've been trying to shout at is for the Scottish Government to start ramping up building regulations so that new builds are built at Green New Deal standard today. So maybe this is a way of getting that pushed through, is to start doing this sort of real life energy modeling surveys that we can use to then make sure that these new buildings are built to the standard that we will need come 2045.
Yeah, and to deal with changing climates. There's the other thing as well.
Yes.
You know, we've seen in the news recently that the impacts of climate change are happening, you know, a lot more severely than the models, and the models behind climate change modeling are much, you know, orders of magnitude more sophisticated than building models, because they have some of the most powerful computers in the world working on them. You know, if you look at an energy map of London, the Met Office computer uses vast amounts of energy, for good reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of the most powerful computers in the UK. The climate models it runs are incredibly sophisticated, and building models, you know, they're not quite the same. They're not bad. I'm trying to be balanced and not be too critical, because I don't think, you know, the idea of having a national building model is a bad thing at all. I think it's a good thing. But building models are very, very not good at dealing with things like humans. I was writing this down yesterday for something totally unrelated. I used to live in a single brick terrace in Leicester where I was doing my PhD. And it was a single brick end terrace, so the end wall was exposed. To make matters worse, the radiators were metal and they were actually screwed into the exposed wall. We had a decent level of loft insulation. I guess it was about 150 mil or something. A similar problem to what I used to have in the old house. It was overheating in summer. But conversely, because of the poor condition of the property, it was freezing cold in winter. So what we used to do during winter, me and my housemate we'd basically live upstairs, because we could use electric heaters rather than the boiler, which was probably more than 15 years old, and the rest poorly maintained, useless letting agency. You know, so bad that the one point our shower broke, we had to withhold our rent in order to get it fixed. You know, that kind of scummy letting agency. So yeah, so during the winter, it would become so cold that if we had friends around, you know, we'd either socialise in our bedrooms, or if we were making dinner, we'd put the gas fire on and blast it. And then during the summer, it would overheat, because the loft insulation was actually quite good. And we rigged up a sort of a chimney system where we had a big standing fan in the hallway, and our bedroom doors open and the windows in the bedrooms open. And we'd use that to draw the cool air up from downstairs. So you get the chimney stack effect, effectively. And there is no way that a building model can cope with that. You know, that's occupants doing the sort of stuff that it goes, that's really non-standard behavior, and things like that. You know, okay, that's maybe a little bit more sophisticated than some people would do, but you know, using all the sorts of adaptive behaviors that people use. You know, people who are quite happy to sit in 12 degrees C or less in large, you know, putting all their clothes on, you know, or people who are, you know, I don't know, people who are happy to wear very little around the house in the heat of the summer and stuff. Yeah, all these adaptive behaviours that happen, and this is before we even get to fuel poor householders who, you know, are in such different situations. I think people need to be aware that there are a significant number of people in Scotland and the rest of the UK, but there are a significant number of people in Scotland who find it so expensive to heat their properties that they just don't. or quite commonly, if they've got a gas meter or electricity meter, they might put £40, £20 on it at the start of the month, and when that runs out, they do without. Now, Ofgem, until a few years ago, basically even refused to recognise that these people existed. I was at a citizens' advice conference, that's about 4 years ago now, and Ofgem had just started this project on self-disconnectors and self-limiters, and I was like, have you not been doing this work already? Imagine the response. I was like, well, I can tell you from a study that we'd done a couple of years before that we'd identified a group of self-limiters. The urban rural study that we did, we worked with, well, one of the organisations we worked with was Loch Elsh and Skye Housing Association, and we were looking at a group of properties of theirs that were built between about 2008 and 2011. They were on a metered biomass heating system. Very, very standard properties, and we knew an awful lot about them. And some of those people were reporting very, very low to near zero energy bills. And it was quite easy. It would have been quite easy for us to turn around and say, right, well, okay, these numbers. If you were a civil servant, you'd probably say, oh, they're outliers, they're errors, we'll just disregard them. But because of actually working with a housing association, we can turn around and go, well, actually, they were self-limiters. And those are the sorts of people that we really need to be getting support to. And not actually to improve the conditions of their properties, because their properties were modern, but to get financial support in, to get support for them to understand their energy bills, to get mental health support in if they were worried about them. Actually, fear of debt is as much a factor as actually being in debt itself when it comes to the sorts of problems that fuel poor householders face. When we deal with the fuel poor, we have to put folk first. I've got to get that in because Ron came up with it, and it's a bit of a meme that's carried on. Another problem we have with the Scottish Government is that they have what they call the fabric first approach. So they want to deal with fuel poverty first by insulating properties and making them all energy efficient and stuff. That's fine for energy efficiency, but when it comes to fuel poverty, it is generally not the technical factors that are the overriding factors. Don't not deal with them. We certainly got to deal with them, but actually we have to look at the people first. Mental health, physical health, ability to understand energy bills, English not being a first language, all these sorts of social problems. So I will always say that you don't understand fuel poverty if you don't understand sort of the building side of it, because that allows you to basically rule out or rule in all the fundamental problems that you can tackle fairly easily and understand how buildings work. But it is predominantly a social problem. And that's something that I really don't think the Scottish Government understands. We've tried. Some will say that they do, in which case, why aren't you funding more community-based energy advocacy services?
This is something that even I've only just recently started to appreciate, and it's really only through my own lived experience as well of trying to fix up my own house and looking at the various grants and loan schemes that could be available to help me out with them. I don't qualify for very many of them because of my own circumstances, but I can end up in the situation where the cost of paying back the loan of insulation could be more than the saving I'm making on the heating, and it might work out over the long term, but that doesn't help me for that month's payment. And if for folk who are more financially stretched than I am, that's a real concern. So I'm going to eliminate that fabric first approach from my own lexicon and move to folk first, because that's something that really is important. That we will have to do a podcast episode in future on the grander scheme of retrofitting strategy as we move into the Green New Deal. We do have an upcoming policy paper on retrofitting in Scotland, so there's that'll be a publication in the not too distant future. We have a massive pile of research here at Commonweal that we're desperately trying to get out, far too much to get out in a way that does them justice. And on that note, Keith, what are you adding to our pile? What's coming up next that you're working on?
Yeah, we were saying this before we came on. We've got a paper on how we can build high-rise with modern cross-laminated timber products, which can be made out of Scottish softwoods, which has been written based on the work of a great dissertation student of mine, Kirsten Mearns, who will hopefully come on a future podcast because she can talk about it, not me. But she's just done a dissertation with me, and it's been great. And she's joined the energy group as well, so hopefully she's going to stay around. We've got, well, you and I are going to be having a meeting with our friends in Inverclyde, Agnes Macaulay and co, next week about how we can do how we can start implementing the Common Home Plan in Inverclyde. There's a similar thing being cooked up here in Fife. Now, I'm not going to say any more on Fife at the moment because we've got something launching on the 9th of August that I can't talk about. But I've been leading it with some names who will be known to. But what I suppose I'll hint at is that the 9th of August is the day that the first the Working Group 1 report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is published. So it might be related to that. And that's all I can say at the moment because we want to keep it a surprise, particularly from our First Minister, maybe.
Well, if she's listening to the show, you'll find out on the 9th of August or shortly afterwards when we get Keith back on to talk about that. Thank you, Keith, for coming back on. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. Always good to see you. And I'm sure we'll be swapping a lot more emails over the next couple of weeks.
Yes, indeed. And I will finish this podcast, as I always do, by reminding folk that Commonweal is an organisation that is entirely funded by our listeners and our supporters. We don't get government money. We don't have corporate sponsorships. We don't even have adverts on our website. We're funded entirely by our donations, which average about £10 a month per person, and from things like our newly reopened shop, where you can come along and buy T-shirts, you can buy merchandise, you can buy our books, including our Green New Deal plan, which shows us how we can actually become a more equal, fairer and decarbonised Scotland by 2045. So please check out our website, Commonweal. Check out our news section on the website, which is being updated regularly now. Sign up to the newsletter and continue listening and sharing the podcast, especially when we're back next week.